An elderly healer is forced to kiss a land baron's boot in front of the whole town, but he doesn't know he just messed with her daughter, a former army ranger. The dust of the town square in Redemption Valley was thick enough to taste. "On your knees, Elara," Colonel Silas Thorne commanded, his voice a low growl that carried in the dead silence. He pointed a leather-gloved finger at the dirt in front of his polished boots. Hidden in the back of the crowd, Joanna watched, her knuckles white as she gripped the splintered wood of a porch post. Her expression was a mask of cold fury. When her mother finally knelt, the entire town held its breath, and Thorne smiled. It was the last smile he would enjoy for a very long time. This story is about a line that should never have been crossed, and the storm that follows. If you believe in standing up to bullies, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and comment with your city and the word justice to show your support. Redemption Valley, Montana wasn't a town on any official map. It was Thorne territory. For 50 years, the Thorne family had owned the land, the silver mine that was its lifeblood, and the souls of the people who worked it. Colonel Silas Thorne, a man who had never served a day in the military but loved the title, had inherited it all. He ruled not as a businessman, but as a king. His word was law, and his enforcers, two burly men named Cletus and Hank, were his executioners. The woman on her knees was Elara, Joanna's mother. She was the town's unofficial healer, a woman who knew the secrets of the mountains, which herbs could break a fever, which roots could soothe a cough. She never asked for payment, accepting only what people could offer: a loaf of bread, a jar of preserves, a mended shirt. She was the quiet heart of a community that had forgotten it had one. Her crime had been an act of compassion. The son of a miner, a boy named Leo, had fallen gravely ill. The company doctor, a man on Thorne's payroll, had demanded a week's wages for a single visit. The family couldn't afford it. So Elara went. She brewed teas and made poultices. Within 2 days, the boy's fever broke. He was sitting up and eating by the end of the week. To Thorne, this was not charity. It was rebellion. It was a message to the people that they didn't need him for everything. It was a crack in the foundation of fear he had so carefully built. And so he decided to make an example of her. "This woman," Thorne announced to the silent crowd, his voice booming, "thinks her weeds and flowers are a substitute for my authority. She went behind my back, offering services that undermine the structure of this town, my town." He nudged his boot forward, the leather gleaming under the harsh afternoon sun. "Here, we have rules. Here, we have order. And that order is maintained by respect." Elara looked up, not at Thorne, but at the faces in the crowd. She saw the shame in their eyes, the fear that kept them silent. She saw the miner whose son she had saved, his head bowed, his fists clenched at his sides, helpless. Her expression was not one of fear, but of profound sadness. She was not afraid for herself, but for them. From the back, Joanna watched every detail. She wasn't just a daughter watching her mother's humiliation. She was a soldier on reconnaissance. She noted Thorne's position, his arrogance making him exposed. She noted Cletus and Hank, one on each side, their hands resting near their holsters, their eyes scanning the crowd, but not really seeing. They were thugs, not professionals. The crowd itself was a tactical element, a wall of witnesses, a sea of fear that could be turned into a tide of anger if given the right push. Joanna had come back to Redemption Valley 6 months ago, seeking peace. After 2 tours overseas as an army ranger, she was done with fighting. She wanted the quiet of the mountains, the comfort of her mother's small home, a life where the only orders she had to follow were her own. She had kept her skills to herself, letting the town see her as just Elara's quiet daughter, the one who left and came back changed. Thorne saw her that way too. A ghost, insignificant. That was his first mistake. "Kiss it," Thorne ordered, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more menacing. "Let them all see what happens to those who forget their place." Slowly, Ilara leaned forward. The town flinched as one. A woman in the front row stifled a sob. The only sound was the wind kicking up dust around Thorn's boots. As her lips touched the leather, a wave of cold, calculated rage washed over Joanna. It was a feeling she knew well. It was the feeling that came before the storm, the calm focus before a mission went live. In that single degrading moment, her peaceful retirement ended. Her new war had just begun. Joanna knew she couldn't face him head-on. Thorn didn't just have money. He had the county sheriff in his pocket and a payroll of men who would do anything for a bonus. A direct attack would be suicide, and it would bring a rain of fire down on the entire town. Vengeance had to be smarter. It had to be silent. It had to be absolute. Thorn's empire was built on secrets, hidden ledgers, illegal water diversions from the local reservation, and the ghosts of those who had crossed him before and simply disappeared. His power was a fortress, but every fortress has a crack in its walls. Joanna wasn't just a soldier, she was her mother's daughter. She knew the valley's hidden trails, the old abandoned mining tunnels that crisscrossed beneath Thorn's property, and the whispers of the people who had suffered under his family's rule for generations. She would use the very land he claimed to own against him, turning his kingdom into his prison. As Thorn finally let her mother stand, brushing off his boot as if it had been dirtied, he scanned the crowd with a triumphant smirk. His eyes passed right over Joanna, without a flicker of recognition. It was his second and most fatal mistake. He had won the battle in the town square, but in the shadows, a war had just been declared. Thorn had demanded a woman kiss his boot to show him respect. But how do you fight a man who owns everything, when all you have is a thirst for justice? The walk home was silent. The crowd had dispersed like smoke, leaving Joanna and Ilara alone on the dusty path leading to their small house at the edge of town. Ilara walked with her head held high, her back straight. She hadn't shed a tear. Her dignity was a fortress that Thorn's humiliation couldn't breach. But Joanna saw the slight tremble in her mother's hands as she reached for the doorknob. Inside, the smell of dried herbs and wood smoke was a familiar comfort. Ilara went straight to the kettle, her movements practiced and calm. She wasn't a victim, she was a survivor, processing the event in her own quiet way. "You have that look in your eye, Joanna," Ilara said, her back still to her daughter. "The one you had before you left for the service." Joanna stood in the middle of the room, her duffel bag still by the door from when she'd first arrived months ago, as if she never truly unpacked. "He crossed a line, Mom." Ilara finally turned, her eyes clear and steady. "Pride is a heavy stone to carry. Don't let my pride be the reason you get hurt." "This isn't about pride anymore," Joanna said, her voice low and hard as granite. "He used you to terrorize an entire town. He declared himself king. This is about pest control." That night, Joanna didn't sleep. She sat at the small kitchen table, cleaning a hunting rifle she hadn't touched since her return. The rhythmic slide and click of the bolt was the only sound in the house. Her plan wasn't about a single rifle shot. That was too easy, too quick. Thorn didn't deserve an end. He deserved to be dismantled piece by piece, his empire turned to dust in his hands. Her first target wasn't Thorn. It was the foundation of his power, fear. Just before midnight, she slipped out of the house. She moved through the unlit streets of Redemption Valley with an unnerving silence, a shadow hugging other shadows. Her destination was a small, dilapidated shack on the Miners' Row, the home of Marcus, the father of the boy Ilara had saved. A dim light flickered through the cracks in the walls. She knocked softly, a specific rhythm. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. A signal she hoped he'd understand meant friend, not foe. The light inside went out. A long silence followed. Joanna waited patiently. Finally, the door creaked open a few inches. Marcus's face was pale in the moonlight. "What do you want?" he whispered, his body blocking the doorway. "To thank you," Joanna said, her voice neutral, "but trying to speak up today. I saw you." Marcus flinched. He had opened his mouth to protest in the square, but a sharp look from Cletus had silenced him instantly. "I didn't do anything." "You wanted to." "That's more than anyone else," Joanna replied. "Your boy, Leo, he's feeling better?" "He's fine. Thanks to your mother," Marcus said, his voice thick with shame. "I'm sorry for what happened to her. We all are." "I don't need apologies," Joanna said, cutting to the point. "I need information. The old silver mines, the ones that run under Thorne's ranch. You worked them before he shut down that section." Fear flashed in Marcus's eyes. "No, I can't. People who ask questions about Thorne's land, they have accidents. You should just leave, take your mother and go." "If we leave, who does he make an example of next? Your wife? Your son?" Joanna's question hung in the cold night air. "He humiliated my mother because she saved your boy. He did it to remind you that your lives belong to him. Are you okay with that?" Marcus looked back into his dark home, where his family was sleeping. He was a man trapped between a tyrant and a ghost. "I need a map, Marcus," Joanna pressed, her voice softer but no less firm. "A map of the old tunnels, section Gamma specifically, the one they sealed off 20 years ago after the cave-in." Marcus's eyes widened. The official story was a tragic accident. But the miners all knew the truth. It wasn't a cave-in, it was a demolition. A section of the mine was deliberately collapsed to bury something Thorne's father wanted hidden. "Why do you want that?" he breathed. "Because Thorne's fortress has a back door," Joanna said simply, "and you're going to help me find it." An hour later, Joanna was back in her kitchen, a yellowed, brittle map spread on the table. Marcus had given it to her, along with a warning. "He uses some of those tunnels to move things he doesn't want seen on the open road. Be careful, they're not all abandoned." Meanwhile, at Thorne's sprawling ranch house, Silas Thorne poured himself a glass of expensive whiskey. Cletus and Hank stood by the fireplace, looking pleased with themselves. "That old woman won't be playing doctor again anytime soon," Cletus grunted. "It wasn't about her," Thorne said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "It was a message for the others, a reminder of the natural order of things." "What about the daughter?" Hank asked, scratching his thick neck. "The army girl." Thorne let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Her? Look at her. A broken soldier who came crawling back to her mother's house. She's seen enough fighting. She's not a threat. She's just another ghost in this valley." He took a long swallow of his whiskey, confident in his assessment. He had no idea the ghost he was dismissing was already inside his walls, metaphorically speaking. Back at the table, Joanna was working. She cross-referenced the old mine map with a modern topographical survey of the valley she'd acquired. Her military training kicked in. She wasn't just looking at tunnels, she was seeing infiltration routes, exfiltration points, structural weaknesses. She identified 3 potential access points to Thorne's property from below ground. One of them, a ventilation shaft, surfaced less than 100 yards from the stables where Thorne kept his prized horses. Her plan began to take shape. It wouldn't be a frontal assault. It would be a campaign of psychological warfare. She would make Thorne feel the same fear and helplessness his workers felt every day. She would turn his own kingdom against him, using its secrets and its shadows. She would become a ghost in his machine. She started with a list, not of weapons, but of assets and vulnerabilities. Thorne's assets, money, manpower, the sheriff. Thorne's vulnerabilities, his arrogance, his illegal dumping of mine waste into the reservation's water supply. The secret of the Section Gamma cave-in, and his prized stallion, a horse worth more than the entire town. Ilara came into the kitchen, wrapped in a shawl. She looked at the maps, at the intense focus on her daughter's face. "This is more than just getting even," Ilara said quietly. Joanna looked up. "I was in the county records office last month, looking up our own deed. I saw the water rights agreements. He's been illegally diverting water from the Flathead Reservation for years, slowly killing their crops. What he did to you was just what we could see. The real disease is in the roots of this valley." She folded the map. He needs to be dug out. Before the first light of dawn, Joanna was gone again. Dressed in dark, practical clothing, she carried a small pack with a climbing rope, a headlamp and a bottle of water. She stood at the mouth of an old, boarded-up mine entrance, miles from town. The air that breathed from the darkness smelled of damp earth and long-forgotten secrets. She pried a loose board away, creating an opening just big enough to slip through. She didn't hesitate. She clicked on her headlamp, its beam cutting a sharp white line into the oppressive black, and stepped into the earth. The operation had begun. The air in the mine was cold and dead, heavy with the silence of decades. The beam from Joanna's headlamp cut through the blackness, illuminating rotting support beams and the skeletal tracks of old ore carts. She moved with purpose, her boots making no sound on the damp, packed earth. This was familiar territory. The darkness, the confined spaces, the need for silent, efficient movement. It was a world she knew well. She followed the map from memory, taking a left fork, then a right, navigating the labyrinthine tunnels that snaked directly beneath Thorne's ranch. After nearly an hour, she found what she was looking for. A vertical shaft, a rusted iron ladder bolted to the rock wall, leading straight up. The ventilation shaft. According to the map, it would surface inside a small stone utility shed next to the stables. She began to climb, testing each rung before putting her full weight on it. The air grew warmer, carrying the faint, familiar scent of hay and horses. She emerged into the shed, a cramped space filled with dusty tools and sacks of feed. The door was locked from the outside with a simple slide bolt. Useless. She worked the hinges loose with a small pry bar. The squeal of the metal barely audible. She slipped out into the night. The main ranch house was a blaze of lights in the distance, but the stables were quiet. A single guard made a lazy circuit, his flashlight beam cutting predictable patterns in the dark. Amateurs. Joanna waited, melting into the shadow of a water trough. She timed the guard's patrol. 2 minutes to walk the perimeter, 30 seconds spent looking at his phone near the main gate. She had a 90-second window. As the guard rounded the far corner, she moved. Thorne's prize stallion, a magnificent black Andalusian named Ozymandias, was in the largest stall. He was a creature of pure ego, a living symbol of Thorne's wealth and power. Joanna didn't use force. She used knowledge her mother had taught her. A soft murmur, a hand offered to be sniffed, a calm and confident presence. The horse, accustomed to rough handlers, responded to her quiet command. She slipped a simple rope halter over its head. The lock on the stall was heavy, but its design was a decade old. 2 small tension wrenches and a rake pick, and it clicked open in under 10 seconds. She led the stallion out of the stall, his hooves muffled by the thick layer of straw on the ground. She didn't lead him toward the main road. Instead, she guided him toward a section of the fence that bordered a steep, wooded ravine. A bolt cutter made a single, muted snap as it severed the thick wire fence. She led the horse down a game trail she knew from her childhood, a path that would never be found by Thorne's men. By the time the guard completed his next round, the stall was empty, the fence was cut, and Joanna and Ozymandias were gone, swallowed by the Montana wilderness. The next morning, the scream of pure rage from Silas Thorne echoed across the valley. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" he roared, standing in the empty stall. Hank and Cletus stood beside him, looking pale. "The fence was cut, boss," Hank stammered. "They just led him out." "Led him out? A $500,000 horse. My horse." Thorne's face was purple. He kicked a water bucket, sending it clattering across the concrete floor. This wasn't a random theft. This was a message. This was that miner. "Marcus, it has to be. Pay back for the old woman." He turned on his men, his eyes blazing. "Find him. Tear this town apart if you have to. I want my horse, and I want the man who took him. Bring him to me." 20 minutes later, Marcus's front door was kicked off its hinges. Thorne stormed in, flanked by his 2 thugs. Marcus's wife screamed, pulling their son, Leo, behind her. "Where is my horse, Marcus?" Thorn demanded, his voice dangerously low. Marcus, who had been getting ready for his shift at the mine, stood his ground. "I don't know what you're talking about." Cletus grabbed Marcus by the front of his shirt and slammed him against the wall. "Don't lie to us. We know you're angry about the old healer. You think this is funny." "I don't have your horse," Marcus choked out. Thorn walked over to Leo, who was crying silently behind his mother. He crouched down, his smile terrifying. "That's a nice boy you have here. It would be a shame if he had another accident, maybe one Ilara's herbs can't fix." The threat was clear. Marcus's face went slack with terror. "I swear to you, Mr. Thorn, I don't know anything." Thorn stood up, his disgust palpable. "You have 24 hours to find my horse. If he is not back in his stall by tomorrow morning, you will all find out what it's like to have nothing." He stormed out, leaving the family shattered. His next stop was the county sheriff's office. Sheriff Brody, a man whose gut hung over his belt buckle, jumped to his feet when Thorn entered. "Silas, what can I do for you?" "Someone stole my stallion," Thorn snapped. "I want roadblocks. I want every barn and shed in this county searched. I want you to put the fear of God into these people until someone talks." Brody nodded eagerly. "Consider it done, Silas. I'll get my deputies on it right away. We'll find him. Don't you worry." But Joanna wasn't worried. She was miles away, in a hidden canyon her grandfather had shown her, where a small stream provided water and a thick canopy of trees provided cover. Ozymandias was grazing peacefully, tethered on a long rope. She had everything she needed to stay hidden for a week. Back at the ranch, the search was turning up nothing. Thorn was pacing in his office like a caged animal. He was losing control, and he knew it. This was an attack on his authority, more direct and damaging than an old woman's charity. Late in the afternoon, Hank came back to the stables looking confused. "Boss, you should see this." He led Thorn back to the empty stall. In the center of the clean straw, almost deliberately placed, was a single small sprig of a plant. It was a sprig of yarrow with its feathery leaves and cluster of tiny white flowers. "What is this?" Thorn demanded. "It's just a weed." "Maybe," Hank said slowly. "But it's the same stuff that old healer Ilara uses for fevers. She's famous for it." Thorn stared at the sprig. A cold knot formed in his stomach. The theft was professional, silent, flawless. But the calling card was personal. It was the calling card of a woman he had dismissed as insignificant. Or worse, the calling card of her quiet, ghost-like daughter. He had assumed the soldier was broken. He was beginning to realize he might have made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had poked a hornet's nest, and now the hornets were coming for him, one by one, from the shadows. Phase 1 was complete. The king was bleeding. Now it was time to apply pressure to the wound. Thorn stared at the yarrow sprig for a long moment before crushing it in his fist. He didn't need proof, he felt it. This wasn't some random thief. This was a calculated strike, and the signature was undeniable. He stormed out of the stables, leaving Hank and Cletus scrambling to keep up. His destination was clear. He didn't bother knocking. The front door of Ilara's small house shuddered as he slammed it open. Ilara was sitting at her table, calmly sipping a cup of tea, as if she had been expecting him. She didn't flinch. "Where is she?" Thorn demanded, his voice filling the small room. Ilara took a slow sip before answering. "If you mean my daughter, I imagine she is enjoying the fine mountain air. She always loved to hike." "Don't play games with me, old woman," Thorn snarled, stepping closer. Cletus and Hank filled the doorway behind him, blocking out the light. "Your daughter stole my horse. I want it back, and I want her. Joanna is a grown woman. She does as she pleases," Ilara said, her gaze unwavering. "Perhaps your horse simply ran away. I hear animals can sense a predator." Thorn's hand twitched, and for a second it looked like he might strike her. But something in Ilara's calm defiance stopped him. It wasn't fearlessness, it was something deeper, an ancient strength he couldn't comprehend or intimidate. Hitting her would be a sign of weakness, and he knew it. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Tell her to return the horse and turn herself in. If she doesn't, I will make sure this town becomes a living hell for every single person you've ever helped, starting with Marcus and his boy." He turned and left, his thugs following like vultures. Ilara remained at the table, her expression unchanged. But once the sound of their truck faded, she let out a long, slow breath. She went to a small wooden chest in the corner of the room, unlocked it, and pulled out a worn, leather-bound book. It was filled with names, dates, and notes on remedies she had provided over the years. It was a record of every family Thorn had squeezed, every injury his unsafe mind had caused, every debt owed. It was a ledger of suffering. And now it was a list of potential allies. Thorn's threat had the opposite effect he intended. News of his visit to Marcus's house, and now to Ilara's, spread through the miners' rows not as a whisper of fear, but as a spark of anger. That evening, Marcus found 2 other miners waiting for him outside his shack. They were older men, their faces etched with decades of coal dust and resentment. "We heard what Thorn did," one of them, a man named Samuel, said. "Threatening your boy. That's a new low, even for him." "What are we supposed to do?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow. "He owns us." "He owns our jobs," Samuel corrected him. "He doesn't own our souls, not yet." He looked around, ensuring they were alone. "There are things happening in that mine, safety shortcuts, equipment that hasn't been inspected in years. We all know it. If we all stop working, if we all demand an inspection," the idea was terrifying. A strike would mean starvation. But Thorn had already threatened them with ruin. For the first time, standing up to him felt less dangerous than doing nothing. A seed of rebellion, planted by Joanna's actions, was beginning to take root in the very ground Thorn thought he owned. Miles away, in the hidden canyon, Joanna was preparing for Phase 2. The horse was a distraction, a way to make Thorn angry and irrational. The real target was his operation. She left Ozymandias with enough food and water for a day, and began a long, arduous trek over the ridge, heading toward the boundary line of the Flathead Reservation. She moved along the creek that Thorn was illegally diverting. The change was stark. On Thorn's side, the water ran full and fast. As soon as it crossed onto reservation land, it slowed to a trickle, the creek bed dry and cracked in many places. She followed the disguised pipeline she'd spotted on the county survey maps. It was a masterful piece of hidden engineering, buried for most of its length, but she knew where to look. She found the pumping station half a mile from the official boundary, cleverly hidden in a dense thicket of aspens and disguised as an old hunter's cabin. A diesel generator, muffled by sound-dampening insulation, provided the power. It was a professional, illegal operation, and it was slowly strangling the farms on the reservation. As she was documenting the setup with a small, durable camera, a voice came from behind her. "You're a long way from home." Joanna spun around, her body instantly coiled for a fight. A man stood there, tall and lean, his face weathered. He wore a simple work shirt and jeans, but he held himself with an air of authority. He wasn't one of Thorn's men. "I could say the same about you," Joanna replied, her hand resting near the knife on her belt. "This is my home," the man said, his eyes flicking from Joanna to the disguised pump house. "My name is Thomas Blackwood. I sit on the tribal council. We've known about this drain for 2 years. We've filed complaints. The State Water Board sends an inspector. The inspector has a nice lunch with Thorn, and the report comes back inconclusive. I'm Joanna," she said, lowering her hand. "My mother is Ilara." Recognition dawned in Thomas's eyes. "The healer. My aunt has spoken of her. She helped her with the lung sickness." He looked at the pump house again. "So, the old woman's daughter is finally doing something about the poisoner." "I'm gathering evidence," Joanna said. "Proof they can't ignore. Thorn owns the inspectors. He owns the sheriff," Thomas said, his voice flat with years of frustration. "Your pictures won't be enough." "Then we make them enough," Joanna countered. "We don't just show them the crime. We show them the consequences." For the next hour, Thomas led her downstream onto reservation land. He showed her the withered corn stalks, the fields lying fallow, the once rich soil turning to dust. He introduced her to an elderly woman whose well had run dry a month ago. Joanna photographed it all. The pump was the weapon. This was the wound. "There's more," Thomas said as they walked back. "He's not just stealing water, he's dumping waste. Tailing ponds from the mine sometimes overflow into this same creek upstream from his diversion. He poisons the water he doesn't want, then steals the water he does." This was the vulnerability Joanna had been looking for. It wasn't just theft. It was a federal crime, an environmental disaster that would bring in agencies far beyond Sheriff Brody's influence. "Can you get me a sample?" Joanna asked. "I can do better," Thomas said, a hard glint in his eye. "I can show you where the bodies are buried." The ghost now had an ally. The whispers in the town were growing into a murmur of defiance. Thorn, believing he was hunting a single thief, had no idea that his entire kingdom was now under siege from two fronts. He thought the problem was a stolen horse, but the real threat was the truth, and it was coming for him like a flood. Thomas Blackwood didn't lead Joanna to a graveyard of headstones, but to a graveyard of water. He took her to a place on the reservation known as the Grey Bend, a section of the creek that should have been teeming with life. Instead, it was silent. The rocks along the bank were stained a sickly, unnatural orange. A faint chemical sheen coated the stagnant pools of water, and there were no fish, no insects, not even bird song in the trees overhead. The air itself felt wrong, carrying a metallic tang. "This is where the overflows end up," Thomas said, his voice a low rumble of contained anger. "Once or twice a year after a heavy rain, one of Thorn's tailing ponds on the mountain accidentally breaches. The sludge flows down here. The sheriff comes, takes a report, calls it an act of nature. Thorn pays a small fine, and the poison just sinks deeper into the ground." Joanna knelt, touching the discolored water. It felt oily. "A small fine is the cost of doing business for him." She looked upstream, toward the mountain that loomed over the valley where the mine was. "The map Marcus gave me, Section Gamma. He said it was collapsed 20 years ago to bury something. My grandfather used to tell stories about that," Thomas said, his eyes narrowing. "He said the rock in that section was different, unstable, but Thorn's father pushed the crews harder and harder. Then one day the tunnel collapsed. 4 men were lost. The official report said it was a tragic, unavoidable accident. Miners don't cause cave-ins with dynamite," Joanna said, standing up. "Marcus said it was a demolition. What if they weren't trying to mine silver? What if they hit something else, something toxic they needed to get rid of, and sealed 4 of their own men in with it to keep the secret?" Thomas finished, the grim realization settling between them. The plan was simple and incredibly dangerous. They had to get inside Section Gamma. While Joanna and Thomas made their way back toward the old mine entrance, Thorn was making good on his promise. The 24-hour deadline had passed. Ozymandias was still gone. Thorn's patience, a notoriously thin commodity, had evaporated completely. He drove his truck not to the town, but to the mine's main entrance just as the day shift was ending. The miners, covered in grime and exhaustion, were streaming out of the lift cage. Thorn stood on the bed of his truck, Cletus and Hank beside him, ensuring he had everyone's attention. "As you all know, a valuable piece of my property was stolen." Thorn's voice, amplified by a bullhorn, echoed off the rock walls. "I gave this community a chance to make it right. That chance has expired." He pointed a finger at Marcus, who stood frozen in the crowd. "Marcus Miller, you're fired. Your family has until sundown to vacate company housing." A wave of shock went through the crowd. Thorne wasn't finished. He pointed to Samuel. "Samuel Jones! You've been whispering about unions for years. You're fired. Get off my land." He pointed to two other men who had shown Marcus support. "You two as well. Fired. Evicted." He swept his gaze over the remaining stunned faces. "This is what happens when you harbor a thief. This is what happens when you forget who signs your paychecks. Anyone else want to be a hero?" Silence. The miners stared at the ground, a mixture of fear and fury on their faces. Thorne had reasserted his power with brutal efficiency. He had cut the head off the snake before it could even form. He jumped down from the truck, a satisfied smirk on his face. He had turned the town against the troublemakers. He was back in control, or so he thought. Hours later, under the cover of darkness, Joanna and Thomas slipped back into the mine. This time, they carried more than just headlamps. They had heavy-duty crowbars, a portable drill, and sample collection kits Thomas had procured from the reservation's environmental office. They navigated the familiar tunnels until they reached the entrance to Section Gamma. It was exactly as Marcus had described. The tunnel didn't just end, it was sealed. A wall of blasted rock and debris, reinforced with concrete, blocked the way. It wasn't the work of a cave-in, it was a tomb. "This will take time," Joanna said, examining the seal. "And it's going to be loud." "No one comes down this far," Thomas said, hefting a crowbar. "Let's get to work." For 2 hours they worked in the suffocating darkness, the sounds of their labor echoing in the dead space. They drilled, they pried, they moved rocks one by one, creating a small, tight opening at the top of the blockage. Finally, Joanna shined her light through the gap. The air that rushed out was foul, thick with the smell of chemicals and decay. It was the smell of the Grey Bend, but 100 times stronger. Joanna, being smaller, squeezed through the opening first. She dropped down onto the floor of the sealed tunnel. Her headlamp beam cut through the darkness, revealing a scene from a nightmare. Dozens of 55-gallon drums, rusted and leaking, were stacked haphazardly throughout the tunnel. A black, tar-like substance oozed from them, pooling on the ground. But that wasn't the worst of it. Against the far wall lay the crushed remains of an ore cart, and next to it, half buried in the sludge and debris, was a single rusted lunch pail with the name P. Hernandez crudely scratched into the lid. "My God," Thomas whispered as he dropped down beside her. It was all there. The illegal dumping, the cover-up, and the proof that the 4 miners hadn't been lost. They had been buried alive, murdered to protect Thorne's secret. Joanna's face was a mask of cold fury. She pulled out her camera and began to work, her movements precise and methodical. She photographed the barrels, the leaks, the ore cart, and the lunch pail. She took multiple samples of the sludge and the surrounding soil, sealing them in airtight containers. They had found the bodies, they had found the weapon, they had found everything. They emerged from the mine just before dawn, exhausted and grim. They didn't speak. The evidence they carried was heavier than any rock. When they reached the edge of town, they saw a somber gathering outside Marcus's shack. His family's meager belongings were piled in the dirt. He, Samuel, and the other fired miners stood with their families, their faces blank with despair. The rest of the town watched from a distance, too afraid to help. Thorne had won. Joanna walked straight into the center of the defeated group. She didn't say a word. She held up her camera and showed Marcus the first picture on the small screen, the rusted lunch pail with P. Hernandez's name on it. Marcus stared at the image, his breath catching in his throat. Pedro. I remember him. He was one of the men who died in the accident. Joanna swiped to the next picture, showing the stacks of leaking barrels. It wasn't an accident, Marcus, she said, her voice cutting through the morning chill, loud enough for everyone to hear. It was a burial. Thorne's father sealed them in there to cover this up, and Thorne has known about it the entire time. A change rippled through the crowd. Despair began to curdle into something else. The fear that had paralyzed them was being burned away by a white-hot rage. They weren't just fighting for their jobs anymore, they were fighting for the dead. The turning point had arrived. It wasn't a whisper of rebellion. It was the roar of an earthquake, about to tear Thorne's kingdom down to its very foundations. The photos on Joanna's camera spread through the crowd like a contagion. Anger replaced fear. Whispers turned into furious murmurs. An old woman in the back made the sign of the cross. A younger miner, his face streaked with dust, spat on the ground. The image of Pedro Hernandez's lunch pail was a symbol they could all understand. It wasn't about a stolen horse or a humiliated old woman anymore. It was about murder. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking, but now with rage, not fear. He looked at Joanna, not as Ilara's quiet daughter, but as a commander. "First," Joanna said, her voice calm and clear, "you take your things and you put them back in your house. He fired you from the mine. He doesn't have the right to make you homeless." It was a direct challenge, a line drawn in the dirt. Marcus looked at Samuel, who gave a grim nod. Together, they picked up a wooden crate filled with kitchen supplies and walked back toward the shack. The crowd parted to let them through, a silent, watchful sea. Joanna turned to Thomas. "Get the samples to the lab in Missoula. Use the contact your council has, the one outside the state board's control. Tell them it's an emergency and we need the results expedited. And send the photos to every news outlet in the state. Don't mention my name. Just say they came from concerned citizens of Redemption Valley." Thomas nodded, already pulling out his phone. "Consider it done." "What about us?" Samuel asked, gesturing to the other miners. "The day shift starts in 1 hour," Joanna said. "Today, nobody goes down. The mine stays closed. We're on strike." It was a declaration of war. The news reached Thorne as he was eating breakfast. Hank burst into the dining room, his face pale. "Boss, you're not going to believe this. The miners, they're refusing to work. They're just standing there at the entrance." Thorne slowly put down his fork. A dangerous calm settled over him. "They're what?" "And Marcus. He moved his stuff back into his house," Hank added, bracing for the explosion. Thorne was silent for a moment, then he laughed, a short, ugly sound. "So, the sheep have found a shepherd. That broken little soldier girl. She actually has some fight in her." He stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Fine. Let's go remind them who owns the flock." When Thorne's truck roared up to the mine entrance, he found the entire day shift crew standing in a silent, solid line blocking the way. They weren't shouting or holding signs. They were just standing there, their arms crossed, their faces hard as the rock they mined. In the front row stood Marcus and Samuel, and standing just behind them, a little off to the side, was Joanna. Thorne got out of his truck, flanked by Cletus and Hank. Sheriff Brody's cruiser pulled up a moment later, the sheriff looking nervous. "This is an illegal gathering," Thorne bellowed, his voice echoing in the morning air. "You are all trespassing on private property. I'm giving you one chance to get back to work. Anyone who goes down that shaft right now keeps their job. The rest of you can join Marcus in the unemployment line." No one moved. The silence was absolute, a wall of defiance. Thorne's face darkened. He pointed at Marcus. "Brody, arrest this man. He's the ringleader." Sheriff Brody shifted his weight, his hand hovering over his sidearm. "Now, Silas, let's not be hasty. Arrest him, or I will have your badge," Thorne roared. Reluctantly, Brody started to walk toward Marcus. But as he did, Samuel stepped in front of him, then another miner, and another. Within seconds, a human wall had formed, protecting Marcus. Brody stopped, outnumbered and outmatched by the sheer force of their will. He looked back at Thorne, helpless. "They're not trespassing, Sheriff." Joanna's voice cut through the tension. She stepped forward, holding her phone. "They're refusing to work in an unsafe environment, which is their legal right." "Unsafe?" Thorne scoffed. "That mine has passed every inspection for the last 30 years. "That's because your inspectors never looked in Section Gamma," Joanna said. She turned her phone so Thorne could see the screen. It was a crystal clear photo of the leaking chemical barrels. "Recognize these?" Or this? She swiped to the photo of the lunch pail. Thorne's blood ran cold. The color drained from his face. He had always known about the secret in Section Gamma, a legacy of his father's ruthlessness. But he never imagined anyone would ever find it. He had underestimated her. He had mistaken a predator for prey. "Those pictures are fake," he blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Doctored. A desperate lie from a thief. The samples are already on their way to a private lab," Joanna said coolly, "and the photos are on their way to the press. And I imagine the EPA will be very interested in why 4 miners were buried alive with a toxic waste dump 20 years ago." The word EPA made Sheriff Brody take a step back. This was no longer a local dispute. This was federal. Thorne stared at Joanna, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The fear was gone from the miner's eyes, replaced by a burning certainty. He had lost them. He looked at Brody, who refused to meet his gaze. He had lost the law. He looked at his own men, Cletus and Hank, who were starting to look at him not as a king, but as a liability. "You!" Thorne whispered, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "You did this." "No," Joanna said, her voice steady. "You did. You and your father. You just never thought you'd have to pay the bill." Just then, a phone buzzed. It was Thomas Blackwood calling Joanna. She answered it, putting it on speaker. "It's done," Thomas's voice said, crisp and clear. "The lab has the samples, and I just got off the phone with a reporter from the Billings Gazette. He's very interested in a story about corporate manslaughter and a 20-year cover-up. He wants to know if you have a comment, Mr. Thorne." Thorne looked around at the faces staring at him, faces that had once feared him, now judging him. He saw the ruins of his empire in their eyes. He was no longer a king. He was just a criminal, exposed and alone. He did the only thing a cornered animal can do. He lunged, not at Joanna, but toward his truck. He was going to run, but the miners didn't move. The human wall held firm. Thorne slammed into Samuel, who didn't even flinch. He was trapped. Cletus and Hank, seeing the tide turn so completely, exchanged a look and took a deliberate step away from their boss. They were saving themselves. The standoff was broken by the sound of another vehicle approaching. It wasn't a sheriff's car. It was a state police cruiser, followed by another. Someone had made a call. The game was over. Thorne stood there, surrounded by the men he had terrorized, his face a mask of disbelief and hatred. He was finally, truly, alone. His kingdom had fallen. The ghost had won. The 2 state troopers who stepped out of the lead cruiser were all business. They were clean-cut, professional, and completely unimpressed by the local drama. One was a tall, stern-faced woman. The other, her younger male partner. They surveyed the scene. The trapped land baron, the silent wall of miners, the disgraced local sheriff, and the calm woman at the center of it all. "What's the situation here, Sheriff?" the female trooper asked, her voice carrying an authority that Brody's had never possessed. Brody stammered, wiping sweat from his brow. Just a labor dispute, officer. A misunderstanding." "It looked like more than that," she said, her eyes locking onto Thorne. "We received a call about a possible hostage situation and obstruction of a federal investigation." Joanna stepped forward and handed the trooper her phone. "This might explain things better." The trooper took the phone and spent a full minute swiping through the pictures from Section Gamma. Her expression remained neutral, but a flicker of something cold and hard passed through her eyes. She showed the phone to her partner, who whistled under his breath. She looked up at Thorne, who was now trembling with impotent rage. "Silas Thorne, you're being detained for questioning regarding allegations of illegal toxic waste disposal and potential homicide. Please place your hands behind your back." For a moment, Thorne looked like he might resist. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape, for an ally, for any remnant of the power he once wielded. He found none. The miners watched him, their faces like stone. Cletus and Hank were already talking to the other trooper, pointing fingers and trying to save their own skins. Sheriff Brody was trying to make himself invisible. Defeated, Thorne turned and put his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the valley. As the troopers led him to their car, he stopped and turned his head, his eyes burning with pure hatred as they found Joanna. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You've just destroyed this town. Without me, this mine closes. You'll all starve. You'll be begging for a man like me to come back." "We'll take our chances," Samuel called out from the crowd. A murmur of agreement rose from the miners. As the state police car pulled away, taking Thorne with it, a strange silence fell over the group. The victory felt heavy. The king was gone, but his kingdom was in ruins, and the future was a terrifying blank page. In the days that followed, Redemption Valley became a different kind of territory. It was now the territory of federal agents in black SUVs, reporters with cameras and microphones, and environmental cleanup crews in hazmat suits. The mine was shut down indefinitely, sealed off behind yellow crime scene tape. The Thorne Ranch was seized as a federal asset. The national news story exploded. "The Redemption Valley Tombs," one headline called it. The story of corporate greed, murder, and a 20-year cover-up was irresistible. But the reporters, hungry for a hero, couldn't find one. Joanna had vanished. She had slipped away from the mine entrance before the last of the state police had even arrived. She made the long trek back to the hidden canyon. Ozymandias greeted her with a soft nicker. He was a loose end, the last piece of the game she had started. She led him not back to the Thorne Ranch, but to a wide, grassy pasture on the edge of the reservation. She took off his rope halter, gave him a final pat on the neck, and watched as he galloped away, a free creature. Then she called Thomas. "The horse is on your land near Grey Bend," she said. "He's just property now. Someone will come looking for him eventually." "They already have," Thomas replied. "The feds are cataloging all of Thorne's assets. A $500,000 horse is high on the list. I'll let them know where they can find him." There was a pause. "The town is looking for you. They're calling you a hero." "I'm not," Joanna said simply. "I'm just a daughter." While the outside world tried to make sense of the story, the town of Redemption Valley began the slow, painful process of healing. The initial shock gave way to a quiet determination. With Thorne gone, the fear that had kept them divided and silent was gone too. In its place, something new began to grow. Marcus and Samuel, no longer just miners, became community organizers. They set up a town hall meeting in the old community center, the first one in decades that wasn't called by Thorne. They worked with the federal victims assistance programs to get support for the families of the 4 murdered miners, whose bodies were being carefully recovered from Section Gamma. Ilara's small house became the town's heart. People brought her food, chopped her firewood, and fixed her leaking roof. They came not just for her remedies, but for her wisdom. She listened to their fears about the mine closing and their hopes for the future. She would brew tea and tell them, "The mountain gave us silver, but it also gave us strength. We still have the strength." The alliance between the town and the reservation solidified. Thomas Blackwood worked alongside Marcus, ensuring that both communities had a voice in the federal investigation and the plans for the mine's future. The illegal water pump was dismantled, and for the first time in years, the creek at Grey Bend began to flow a little stronger. A week after Thorne's arrest, Joanna sat on her mother's porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. The town was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of peace. Ilara came out and sat beside her. "The lab results were confirmed today," she said. "Arsenic, lead, mercury, a whole cocktail of poisons. They formally indicted him on 4 counts of murder." Joanna nodded, saying nothing. "And Sheriff Brody was forced to resign. They're investigating him for obstruction of justice," Ilara continued. "Cletus and Hank took a plea deal. They'll testify against him." The pieces of Thorne's empire were being swept away, one by one. "Are you happy, Joanna?" Ilara asked softly. Joanna thought for a moment. Happy isn't the right word. I feel balanced. The scales were tipped for so long, now they're level. She looked toward the town square, the very spot where her mother had been forced to kneel. A group of children were playing there, their laughter carrying on the evening air. Marcus was there talking with Thomas Blackwood, not as a desperate miner and a tribal representative, but as two men planning a future. They weren't just neighbors anymore, they were partners. Joanna had come home looking for peace, thinking it meant solitude and quiet. She had been wrong. Peace wasn't the absence of a fight. It was the outcome of a fight worth having. She hadn't just gotten revenge for her mother. She had liberated a town, and in the process had finally found a way to lay down the weapons she had been carrying inside her for years. The war was over. She was finally home. 6 months passed. The media frenzy died down, the federal agents packed up their files, and the town of Redemption Valley was left to figure out what came next. Thorne's trial was set to begin in Helena, a spectacle the townspeople had little interest in attending. Their focus was on survival. The mine, the valley's sole economic engine, remained closed, pending the results of a massive EPA Superfund cleanup that was projected to take years. Thorne's final spiteful prophecy seemed to be coming true. The town was dying. The community center, once a symbol of renewed hope, now hosted somber meetings about foreclosure assistance and job relocation programs. The unity forged in the face of a common enemy began to fray under the strain of unemployment. Marcus and Samuel worked tirelessly, but they were trying to patch a sinking ship with goodwill and determination. It wasn't enough. Joanna watched it all from the quiet of her mother's porch. She had refused all interviews, becoming a local legend known only as the Ghost. She helped where she could, repairing fences for families who couldn't afford a handyman, hunting to provide fresh meat for the community food bank. But she stayed in the shadows, her war supposedly over. Yet a sense of incompletion gnawed at her. They had cut off the serpent's head, but the body was still thrashing, poisoning the valley with despair. One evening, Thomas Blackwood came to see her. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. "The council is getting desperate," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "The cleanup is stalled in bureaucratic red tape. The federal funds promised to our communities for the damages are tied up in the same mess. We won the battle, Joanna, but we're losing the peace. What do you want me to do, Thomas?" Joanna asked, her voice flat. "The law is handling it now. The law is a slow, grinding machine. People are leaving, Joanna. In another year, there won't be a town left to save. Thorne is going to win from his prison cell. He'll get to watch this valley turn into a ghost town, just like he said." Thomas leaned forward, his voice intense. "But there's something else. Something I found in the old county archives, while I was digging for more evidence on the water rights." He pulled a folded yellow document from his jacket pocket and spread it on the small porch table. It was an original survey map of the valley, dating back to the late 1800s. "This is the original Thorne homestead claim," Thomas explained, tracing a line with his finger. "It was filed by Silas's great-grandfather. Look at the boundaries. Now look at this." He laid a more recent map beside it. "This is the current map of Thorne's property. It's almost twice as large." "He bought up the surrounding land over the years," Joanna said. "Some of it," Thomas agreed, "but not this section here." He pointed to a large tract of land that included the richest silver veins of the mine. "This section was never sold. It was originally deeded to the valley itself as a public trust by the railroad company that first surveyed the area, to be used for the common good and prosperity of the community." Joanna stared at the map, the implications clicking into place. "Thorne doesn't own the mine. His family never did," Thomas confirmed. "They owned the land around it. At some point, his grandfather, a man with a lot of influence and a crooked surveyor, adjusted the property lines on the county filings. Everyone just assumed the mine was his. He built his empire on a foundation of stolen land. This was the final piece. The key to not just punishing Thorn, but to saving the valley. It wasn't enough to put him in jail. They had to take back what was theirs. The original deed? Joanna asked, her voice now sharp with focus. It should be in the county records vault. But getting a court to recognize an 1880s public trust deed over a century of fraudulent filings, it's a long shot. We'd need an army of lawyers we can't afford, Thomas said, his initial excitement fading. We don't need an army of lawyers, Joanna said, a cold fire returning to her eyes. We need leverage. The plan she formulated was audacious, a final decisive strike. It targeted Thorn's greatest remaining asset, his pride. The trial of Silas Thorn began on a cold Monday morning. The courtroom was packed. Thorn, dressed in an expensive suit, looked confident, almost arrogant. His high-priced legal team had spent the pre-trial hearings poking holes in the testimony of Cletus and Hank, painting them as disgruntled, unreliable employees. They were preparing to argue that Thorn had no knowledge of the toxic waste, that it was a secret his father had taken to the grave. It was a plausible defense that could reduce murder charges to negligence. The prosecution's star witness was set to be the unnamed citizen who had discovered the tomb in Section Gamma. The press buzzed with speculation about who this mystery witness was. When the bailiff called her name, a ripple of shock went through the courtroom. The prosecution calls Joanna Miller. Joanna walked to the stand. She was dressed simply in jeans and a plain shirt. She looked not at the lawyers or the judge, but directly at Silas Thorn. For the first time, he saw her not as a ghost or a broken soldier, but as the architect of his ruin. The confidence on his face wavered. Joanna's testimony was devastating. She spoke in a clear, objective voice, using her military training to deliver a concise, factual report. She detailed her infiltration of the mine, the discovery of Section Gamma, the evidence she found. She presented the photographs, the maps, the timeline of events. She was unshakable under cross-examination, her answers precise and without emotion. But she had saved her masterstroke for the end. And Mr. Thorn, the prosecutor said, why do you believe he went to such lengths to protect this secret? It wasn't just about the murder of 4 men, Joanna said, her voice ringing with clarity. It was about protecting the source of his family's power, a source they never had any right to in the first place. Thorn's lawyer leaped to his feet. Objection! Speculation! Sustained, the judge said. But it was too late. Joanna had planted the seed. She then looked directly at the jury. Thorn's entire empire, the mine itself, was built on land stolen from the people of Redemption Valley over 100 years ago. Objection! The lawyer screamed. Ms. Miller, you will answer only the questions asked, the judge warned. Joanna simply nodded. The damage was done. The story was now out there. During the lunch recess, as Thorn was being led back to a holding cell, a court officer handed him a thick manila envelope. Inside was a high-quality copy of the original 1880s public trust deed, a formal petition signed by every single resident of Redemption Valley and the Flathead Tribal Council to reclaim the land, and a handwritten note on a simple piece of paper. It contained only 4 words: checkmate, kiss my boot. Thorn stared at the note, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The murder charges might land him in prison for life. But this was different. This was the complete and utter destruction of his name, his legacy, everything his family had built. Joanna hadn't just come for his freedom, she had come for his very identity. He was no longer Silas Thorn, the king of Redemption Valley. He was just the son of a thief. And in that moment, in the cold silence of the holding cell, he finally, truly broke. The war was over, but the final act of vengeance was about to be delivered. When court resumed, Silas Thorn was a different man. The arrogant composure was gone, replaced by a twitching, volatile energy. His lawyers tried to whisper to him, but he stared straight ahead, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the defendant's table. He was a king who had just learned his throne was made of cardboard. The prosecution rested its case. The evidence was overwhelming. Now it was the defense's turn. Thorne's lead attorney, a slick lawyer named Peterson, stood up to call his first witness. But Thorne shot out a hand and grabbed his arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "No," Thorne said, his voice a low rasp. "Silas, what are you doing?" Peterson hissed. "We have a strategy." "Change of plans," Thorne said, standing up. "I want to take the stand." A wave of confusion and excitement went through the courtroom. Peterson argued with his client in frantic whispers, but Thorne was adamant. He shrugged off his lawyer's hand and strode to the witness stand, a man walking to his own execution. Peterson, forced into a corner, began his direct examination, trying to guide his client through their prepared narrative. "Mr. Thorne, did you have any knowledge of the chemical waste stored in the sealed-off section of the mine?" Thorne looked not at his lawyer, but at the jury, and then his eyes settled on Joanna, who sat in the front row. A strange, twisted smile touched his lips. "Knowledge? Of course I had knowledge. My father wasn't a subtle man. He told me exactly what he did. He called it securing our legacy." Peterson's face went pale. The prosecutor, on the other hand, leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "And the 4 men who died in the cave-in?" Peterson asked, desperately trying to salvage the situation. "Casualties of progress," Thorne said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "They were getting greedy, asking for hazard pay. My father solved the problem. He gave them a permanent retirement." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Thorne was confessing, not just to the cover-up, but to being an accessory to murder after the fact. His lawyer sank into his chair, head in his hands. "Why?" the prosecutor asked when it was his turn for cross-examination, his voice barely a whisper, knowing he was being handed a gift. "Why admit this now?" Thorne laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Why? Because she's already taken everything. What's a life sentence when you have nothing left to live for? My name, my land, my legacy. It was all a lie anyway, wasn't it?" He locked eyes with Joanna again. "She didn't just want to send me to prison. She wanted to erase me, and she has." He leaned into the microphone. "So yes, I knew. I let the poison seep into the reservation's water. I stole their livelihood. I let my workers get sick from unsafe conditions. I threatened children, and I would do it all again. Because that is what it means to be a Thorne. We take what we want." It was a final, defiant roar from a dying king. The jury didn't even need to deliberate for long. The verdict came back in under an hour. Guilty on all counts. 4 counts of felony murder, multiple counts of environmental crimes, racketeering. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would die in prison. But Joanna knew the real victory wasn't happening in the courtroom. It was happening back in Redemption Valley. The news of Thorne's confession and the revelation of the stolen land grant acted as a catalyst. The bureaucratic red tape that had stalled the cleanup and the community funds was suddenly sliced through by the force of public outrage and political pressure. The story was no longer just about a corrupt land baron. It was about a town and a tribe fighting to reclaim their stolen birthright. Federal grants were fast-tracked. A new community-led oversight committee, co-chaired by Marcus Miller and Thomas Blackwood, was formed to manage the funds and the future of the mine. They decided against reopening it as a silver mine. Instead, they partnered with a green energy company to explore the possibility of using the vast underground network for a geothermal energy project. The poison of the past would be used to power a clean future. The Thorne Ranch House and its surrounding legally owned lands were auctioned off. The proceeds were split, with half going to a trust for the victims' families and the other half going to the community fund. Redemption Valley, for the first time in its history, had capital. It had a future. A month after the verdict, the town held a ceremony in the square. It wasn't a celebration of victory, but a memorial for the dead and a dedication to the future. The families of the 4 murdered miners were there. Ilara stood with them, offering comfort. Marcus and Thomas stood on a small makeshift stage. For 100 years, this valley was owned by one family, Marcus began, his voice strong and steady. Today, it belongs to all of us. We are no longer Thorn territory. We are Redemption Valley, and we are redeeming our future together. Joanna watched from the back of the crowd, just as she had on that day of humiliation. She wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. She was simply observing, a quiet guardian. She saw Leo, Marcus's son, playing with a group of children from the reservation. She saw Samuel laughing with a former mine foreman, planning the first project for the new town cooperative. Her mother found her, a warm shawl in her hands. "It's getting cold," Ilara said, draping it over Joanna's shoulders. "It's over, Mom," Joanna said, a profound sense of finality in her voice. "It's really over." "No," Ilara said, taking her daughter's hand. "It's just beginning." D. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the valley, Joanna finally understood. The rage that had driven her was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady warmth. Vengeance had been the fire that cleared the dead wood, but it was the community, the resilience of the people that was the new growth. She had come home to find peace and had started a war, but in the ashes of that war, she had found something more, a purpose. And for the first time since she'd left for the army, the ghost inside her was finally at rest. The final, perfect act of vengeance wasn't seeing Thorn rot in a cell. It was watching the community he tried to break rise from the dust, stronger and more united than ever before. 1 year later, Redemption Valley was almost unrecognizable. The constant presence of EPA crews in white hazmat suits was a strange but welcome sign of progress. The Geothermal Project, a joint venture between the new Redemption Valley Cooperative and the Flathead Tribal Council, was breaking ground near the old mine entrance. It was hard, slow work, but it was their work. For the first time, the profits would flow back into the community, not into a single man's pocket. The town was breathing again. Joanna had found a new rhythm. She was no longer a ghost. She had accepted a position as the head of the newly formed Valley Search and Rescue Team, a role that combined her military skills with her intimate knowledge of the mountains. She was training a team of young volunteers from both the town and the reservation. The duffel bag that had sat by her door for so long was finally unpacked. The peace was shattered by a letter. It arrived at the small, tidy home of Maria Hernandez, the widow of Pedro Hernandez, the man whose lunch pail had been the key to unlocking the whole conspiracy. The letter bore the postmark of the maximum security prison in Helena. Maria's hands trembled as she opened it. It was from Silas Thorn. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an apology. It was a temptation. "Mrs. Hernandez," the letter began, the handwriting surprisingly neat and controlled. "The courts have failed to provide you with true justice for your husband's death. The money from my estate has been seized and diluted, a pittance spread among lawyers and government agencies. Your family deserves more. My father was a man of many secrets. He kept a private cache, a contingency fund that no one, not even his lawyers, knew about. Untraceable gold bullion and bearer bonds. It is buried on the northern ridge of my former property, at the base of the lightning-scarred pine tree. The coordinates are enclosed. Consider it a private reparation, from one family to another. Do with it what you will." Maria read the letter 3 times. The coordinates were precise. She knew the tree he was talking about. The value of the cache, as Thorn described it, would be enough to change her family's life forever. Enough to leave this struggling town, to send her grandchildren to college, to erase decades of hardship. All she had to do was take it. No one would ever know. That night, at the weekly town co-op meeting, Maria Hernandez stood up, the letter shaking in her hand. The room fell silent. I received something," she said, her voice strained. "From him." She read the letter aloud. A wave of shock, then a low, greedy murmur rippled through the community center. The unity that had been their greatest strength suddenly felt fragile. "It's a trap," Samuel said immediately. "What if it's not?" a younger man countered from the back. "Maria deserves that money. Her husband died because of his father. If she takes it, what about the other families?" someone else called out. "What about all of us who lost years of our lives to that man?" The room descended into a tense, angry debate. Thorne's final prophecy, that without him they would turn on each other, was coming true. He had planted his last, most potent poison, greed. Joanna, who had been sitting in the back, watched the scene unfold. This was a fight she couldn't win for them. They had to win it for themselves. Marcus finally called for order. "This isn't about the money. Don't you see what he's doing? He's testing us. He's trying to prove he was right about us all along." "It's easy for you to say, Marcus," the young man shouted back. "You have a position on the board. Some of us are still struggling to make ends meet." The argument grew hotter, the fragile trust between neighbors beginning to crack. Finally, Joanna stood up. She didn't shout. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a razor. "He made my mother kiss his boot," she said. Every eye in the room turned to her. "He did it to show us we were worthless, that we were beneath him. He wanted us to believe that dignity was a luxury we couldn't afford." She walked to the front of the room and stood beside Maria. "This letter is the same thing. It's his boot. He's holding it out, daring us to kiss it. Daring us to prove that we're just as greedy and selfish as he is. He's trying to win the war from inside a cage. The question isn't whether the gold is real. The question is, are we going to kneel?" Her words hung in the air, thick and heavy. The anger in the room subsided, replaced by a grim understanding. They were standing at a precipice, and they all saw it. Maria Hernandez, a woman who had spent most of her life in the quiet background, straightened her shoulders. She looked at the letter, then tore it into 4 perfect squares and let the pieces fall to the floor. "My husband's memory is not for sale," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. "But that gold is still out there, and it is not Thorne's. It is stolen wealth. It belongs to this valley." A plan formed, not from Joanna, but from the group, a collective, unified response, the final act of the war against Silas Thorne. The next morning, a procession of nearly 50 people, miners, townsfolk, and members of the tribal council walked up the northern ridge. Joanna, Marcus, Thomas, and Maria led the way. They followed the coordinates to the lightning-scarred pine. It took 2 hours of digging, but they found it, a heavy, sealed metal footlocker. They didn't open it. They carried it together down the mountain and placed it in the center of the town square, on the exact spot where Ilara had been forced to kneel. Then Marcus made a call, not to the police, not to the feds, but to the reporter from the Billings Gazette. When the reporter arrived, he found the entire town gathered around the footlocker. Joanna stood beside her mother, her arm around her shoulders. Marcus and Thomas stepped forward. "Silas Thorne tried to play one last game," Marcus announced to the camera. "He tried to poison us with greed. He failed." Thomas added, "This wealth was stolen from this land and its people. We are returning it. Every last ounce will be turned over to the federal government with one condition, that it be used to expedite the EPA cleanup and to create a permanent scholarship fund for the children of this valley in the names of the 4 men the Thorne family murdered." It was the ultimate act of defiance. They had taken Thorne's final, hateful act of vengeance and transformed it into a legacy of healing and hope. They hadn't just refused to kiss the boot. They had melted it down and forged it into a future. 5 years later, the dust was gone. Paved roads had replaced the dirt tracks in Redemption Valley, and the town square, once a stage for humiliation, was now a green park with a small playground. A bronze plaque stood near a newly planted oak tree, listing the names of the 4 miners who had been murdered in Section Gamma. It was dedicated to the men who laid the first foundation. The quiet hum in the air wasn't from the wind kicking up dust, but from the geothermal plant on the mountain. It was fully operational, powering not only Redemption Valley, but selling surplus energy back to the state grid. The Redemption Valley Cooperative was profitable. The town was thriving. On the porch of what used to be the company doctor's office, a new sign read, Ilara's Community Health Clinic. Dai, Ilara, though older, still moved with a quiet grace, now overseeing 2 young nurse practitioners who had been funded by the co-op. She provided her herbal remedies alongside modern medicine, a perfect blend of the old valley and the new. Joanna stood at the edge of the park, watching the dedication ceremony for the new clinic. She wore the dark green and black uniform of the Valley Search and Rescue. Her team, a mix of young men and women from the town and the reservation, stood with her. They were a disciplined professional unit, respected throughout the county. The ghost was gone, replaced by a leader. Marcus Miller, now the elected mayor of Redemption Valley, spoke at the podium. He was grayer, but his face was filled with a confidence he'd never had as a miner. Standing beside him was Thomas Blackwood. Their partnership had become the bedrock of the valley's new identity. "This clinic is more than a building," Marcus said, his voice carrying over the quiet crowd. "It's a promise that no one in this valley will ever have to choose between their health and their paycheck again." Joanna's eyes found Leo, Marcus's son, in the crowd. He was a teenager now, standing tall and healthy. He was the first recipient of the Hernandez Scholarship, and he was leaving for college in the fall to study engineering. He wanted to come back and work at the geothermal plant. The ceremony ended, and people milled about, sharing coffee and pastries from the new bakery that had opened on Main Street. Thomas walked over to Joanna. "Good speech," Joanna said with a small smile. "Marcus wrote it," Thomas replied. "I'm just there to look important." He looked out at the transformed town. "You know, we still get calls from reporters sometimes. They're still trying to write the story of the lone hero who saved the town." "And daddies, tell them they're looking in the wrong place," Joanna said, nodding toward the crowd. "The heroes are right there." She had testified at the civil trials, providing the evidence that officially returned the mine and its lands to the public trust. She had given her report, and then she had stepped back, letting the town build its own future. Her war was over. Their peace was just beginning. Hundreds of miles away, in the sterile, grey world of the Montana State Prison, Silas Thorne sat in the prison library. He was thinner, his face gaunt, the fire in his eyes long since extinguished. He no longer carried himself like a king. He was just another inmate in a drab grey jumpsuit. The other prisoners left him alone. He was a man with a life sentence and no connections on the outside, which made him irrelevant, powerless. He methodically read the newspapers, a habit from his old life he couldn't break. He skimmed past the state politics and the national news until he found a small article in the business section of the Billings Gazette. The headline read, "Redemption Valley Geothermal Project exceeds projections, declares first community dividend." The article detailed the co-op's success, the new clinic, the scholarship fund, and the revitalization of the town. It praised the innovative partnership between the town and the Flathead tribe. It mentioned Mayor Marcus Miller and Councilman Thomas Blackwood. It mentioned the Hernandez Scholarship. Silas Thorne's name appeared only once, in a single sentence describing him as the disgraced former owner of the land. He read the article twice. There was no flicker of rage, no tightening of his jaw. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. His final brilliant move, the letter, the gold, had not only failed to destroy them, it had become the cornerstone of their success. They had taken his poison and turned it into medicine. He wasn't a villain in their story anymore. He wasn't even a memory. He was a footnote. He carefully folded the newspaper and slid it back onto the rack. He stood up, and walked back toward his cell, his footsteps silent on the concrete floor. He was completely and utterly erased. That evening, Joanna sat on her mother's porch, the same porch where she had planned her war. The air was cool and clean. The hum of the plant was a distant, reassuring presence. "Maria Hernandez stopped by today," Ilara said, handing Joanna a cup of tea. "She brought me a jar of her spiced peaches. She said to thank you." "She doesn't need to thank me," Joanna said. "She's the one who was brave." "Bravery is a seed, Joanna," Ilara said, looking out at the lights twinkling in the valley below. "Sometimes it just needs the right person to plant it." They sat in comfortable silence for a long time. The ghosts of the past were gone, not just from the valley but from Joanna's eyes. The rage had been replaced by a deep, settled calm. The vengeance was complete, not because her enemy was suffering, but because her family, her mother, her town, her valley was finally safe and finally free. So, we come to the end of our story. It began with a single defining act of cruelty in a dusty town square. A powerful man, Silas Thorne, forced an elderly healer, Ilara, to kneel and kiss his boot. For him, it was a simple demonstration of power, a reminder to the people of Redemption Valley that they were his property. What he failed to understand was that this act of humiliation wasn't an ending. It was the pulling of a pin from a grenade. He thought he was dealing with a frail old woman, but he had just declared war on her daughter, Joanna, a former army ranger who understood strategy, tactics, and the precise application of force. Joanna's response was not the blind rage of a daughter seeking simple revenge. It was a methodical, multi-front assault on the very foundations of Thorne's empire. She didn't meet his force with force. She met his arrogance with intelligence. The theft of his prized stallion wasn't just a theft. It was a psychological operation designed to make him angry, irrational, and overplay his hand. The use of the old mine tunnels wasn't just a convenience. It was a tactical infiltration, using the very ground he claimed to own as a highway into the heart of his secrets. Her alliance with Thomas Blackwood and the Flathead tribe wasn't just a partnership. It was the opening of a second front, bringing in legal and moral authority that Thorne couldn't control with his money or his thugs. She dismantled him piece by piece, not with a single shot, but with 1,000 cuts. However, the most crucial turn in this war wasn't fought by Joanna alone. The true victory began when the fight became bigger than one woman's quest for justice. It happened when Marcus Miller, a man who had been terrorized into silence, chose to hand over a map, an act of quiet rebellion. It happened when the miners, faced with being fired and evicted, chose to stand together in a silent, unbreakable line, forming a human wall that Thorne's power could not breach. They transformed from fearful sheep into a defiant flock, and Joanna was no longer a lone wolf. She was their shepherd. But Thorne had one last move, one final venomous play from his prison cell. The letter to Maria Hernandez was his masterpiece of cynicism. He couldn't win with fear anymore, so he tried to win with greed. He offered a fortune to the widow of a man his family had murdered, betting everything on the belief that deep down, everyone had a price. He believed he could prove that their unity was a sham, that their dignity was a performance, and that when faced with a choice between community and self-interest, they would choose themselves, just as he always had. He was trying to force them one last time to kiss his boot in exchange for gold. And that is where he suffered his ultimate defeat. Not in the courtroom, not at the hands of the state police, but in the Redemption Valley Community Center. When Maria Hernandez tore up that letter, and when the town chose to turn that hidden treasure into a public good, they didn't just reject Thorne's offer. They rejected his entire worldview. They proved him wrong about who they were, and in doing so, they won the war for the soul of their valley. In the end, Silas Thorne's punishment became far more profound than life in prison. A man who built his identity on his name and legacy was rendered a footnote in his own story. His name is now attached to murder and theft, while the names of his victims are etched on a plaque and attached to a scholarship fund that will build the very future he tried to smother. His stolen gold is now paying to heal the land he poisoned. That was Joanna's true, shocking act of vengeance, not to destroy Thorn, but to make him irrelevant. To erase him so completely that the new, thriving Redemption Valley would be built not just on the ruins of his empire, but on the ashes of his very memory. This story, which started with a woman forced to kneel, ended with an entire community learning how to stand on its own. This has been an incredible journey, and if you've stayed with us through every twist and turn, you are a vital part of our community. We create these stories for you, and your support means everything. We want to know what part of Joanna's strategy or the town's resilience resonated with you the most. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that standing up to bullies, no matter how powerful they are, is a fight worth having, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps our stories reach more people who need to hear them. And to show us you made it all the way through, please comment with the phrase, "I watched until the end." Seeing that support truly motivates us to keep going. Thank you once again for being here. There is another story of justice and resilience waiting for you on the end screen right now. We invite you to click on it and join us for the next chapter. We'll see you there.